Welcome back to this week's episode of Hormones, Metabolism, and You. I'm your host, Dr. Cassie Smith. I'm a functional medicine endocrinologist based out of Oklahoma City. Today, I am interviewing Dr. Bruce Hoffman, and we had a very interesting conversation about mitochondria. So if you follow me at all, or you know anything about modern endocrine, you know that we approach health a little differently through this 10 steps to ultimate wellness. Our very first step is mitochondrial health. The mitochondria are the powerhouse of your cell. They're responsible for energy production, is one of the main things, although they have about 16 different functions, which we talk about in our podcast today. It's my belief that if your mitochondria are not functioning well or efficiently, it is impossible to cure chronic illness and to make you feel better. Because without that ability to produce energy and without that ability of that energy to move from cell to cell and allow your cells to function, you're never going to get better. And so this is very different than traditional medicine, but it is a functional medicine approach. And so I found a mitochondrial expert, and I did this with Dr. Bruce Hoffman. So he really looks at the function of the mitochondria. He has years of research. He practiced for 30 plus years. And he actually has a new course out as well, which is called The 7 Stages, the program of a new medical curriculum. And we talk about this in the show. I'm also going to give you guys a link where you can see a webinar he did for 90 minutes about just the mitochondria. But what we talked about today was how do you restore a cell back to a health cycle? So we know that any sort of chronic disease or illness, there's a lot of mitochondrial damage or mitochondrial issues with that illness and in that person. And so he talked about the cell danger response. So what happens in your cells when you become ill? What happens when you have a toxin, an outside toxin that enters your body? If you have mold, what happens when you are holding cell phones or seeing blue light or not getting enough sunlight? And so we talked about all that, and he explains at a cellular level what happens to your cell. And this is called the cell danger response. And then he talked about how you restore back cellular health cycles. So he talks about how there are 3 cycles of health in a cell. And when you activate this cell danger response, you want the cell, when it's activated, to progress through these 3 stages of, this health cycle so that your cell can restore itself. A lot of people get stuck in this stage 1 of this cell danger response, and then they have all these inflammatory cytokines that are made, bad things start happening, and that's why you ultimately get sick. So we talked about this. We had a very interesting conversation about what are some ways that we can restore people back to this health cycle with simple things. Like he focuses on energy, he focuses on trauma, he focuses not only on nutrition, but other things. And so he was saying that from an energy standpoint, he's very into quantum physics. From an energy standpoint in your body, things like water, grounding, and light are actually more important for your mitochondria than food. And so he gave some very just examples that anyone can use about how do you ground, how do you get the proper light and the proper water so that your body can go back to restoring itself in this health cycle. We talked a lot about just in general his course, and again, mitochondrial damage and some different things you can do in order to stop this. And interestingly enough, I asked him, wonder if you're one of the millions or maybe billions of people out there who live in cities, who live in New York City, who live somewhere where you can't go outside and watch the sun come up in the grass every morning. And so he had a very interesting answer to that question that you'll have to listen to the episode to get. But I am super excited for you guys to hear this episode. And if any of this resonates with you and you're like, oh my gosh, I know somebody who's chronically ill. I know somebody who needs to hear this. I know somebody who has tried every medication, seen every doctor, and things haven't worked. And you really want to get to the bottom of chronic illness and understand your mitochondria and inflammation and how you get cells to respond and go back to a healthy cell cycle, then please, please, please send them this link right now so they can hear this podcast. Dr. Bruce Hoffman is a Calgary-based integrative and functional medicine doctor/practitioner. He's the medical director at the Hoffman Center for Integrative Medicine and the Brain Treatment Center of Alberta, specializing in complex medical conditions. He was born in South Africa and obtained his medical degree from the University of Cape Town. He has a master's degree in clinical nutrition, is a certified functional medicine practitioner, is board certified with a fellowship in anti-aging, hormones, and regenerative medicine from A4M, a certified Shoemaker mold treatment protocol practitioner, certified Ayurvedic practitioner, certified family constellation therapist, and ILADS trained in the treatment of Lyme's disease and co-infections. So he does all the things, you guys. He's co-authored a paper published by Dr. Afrin's group, Diagnosis of Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, a Global Consensus. In addition to his clinical training, Dr. Hoffman has studied with many of the leading mind, body, and spiritual healers of our times, including Robert Lowe and John Kabat-Zinn. He has shared the stage with Dr. Deepika Chopra and Dr. John Dematri, and he continues to spread his inspiring vision of healing and wellness with audiences and patients around the world. So he is one of the functional medicine gurus when it comes to just very complex patients. As you can see, he spent his career getting lots of training, and so he talks about this in this episode, and I cannot wait for you to hear all the things that we talk about. So let's dive in. So today I have Dr. Bruce Hoffman, and I'm very excited to have you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hormones, Metabolism, and You. I want to start by having you give everyone a brief 5-minute or so synopsis of, I guess, how you got here in life, your career path, and what you do every day.
So I trained as a MD in Cape Town, South Africa, came to Canada, did 6 years as a primary care provider in rural Saskatchewan, and then started to become curious about what could be done to assess and treat complex illness across all the layers and levels of experience. And so I just became curious and started to investigate multiple different modalities of the healing paradigm. I did a lot of work with traditional Chinese medicine, with acupuncture, herbology, Ayurvedic medicine, studied a lot of the mold illness criteria, did a lot of work on family systems and family constellation therapy, did a lot of work with mast cell activation syndrome, Lyme disease, all the things that sort of lead to a person presenting with chronic complex illness. And then over the years, I developed a model of how to approach it that was broken down into didactic sort of steps. And I based it on the Ayurvedic model of the human experience having layers and levels to it. They're called koshas in Ayurveda. And the layers and levels that I use diagnostically and therapeutically and conceptually are, the first level is the external environment. So everything that comes from the external environment, we call that the environmental body, that then can impact and interact with the dynamic physical body, which is made up of biochemistry and structure. So that's the world that we occupy in traditional medicine and in functional medicine. People come with symptoms with physical issues and physical ailments. That's stage or level 2 in the model. And level 3 in the model is everything to do with physics and electromagnetics. That's to do with the way the sun, water, and magnetism influence the electron transport chain and create the ATP, which runs everything. Or the mitochondria sense danger, and then they go into the shutdown response and create an inflammatory response to the incoming toxins from level 1. So that's level 3, is electromagnetics. Level 4 is everything to do with emotions and trauma, which we know is huge in this space right now. People who have adverse childhood experiences, inherited and early developmental trauma, have a very different HPA axis, if you will, and a very different response to chronic complex illness. They often have PTSD symptoms and very often medical PTSD symptoms because they get told it's all in their head a lot of the time. And they often go from pillar to post trying to stabilize. And then level 5 is to do with the ego and the intellect and the mind. And that has everything to do with the operational sense of self, your defenses, your values, your internal dialogue, and how you approach the world through your first half of life ego sense, how you set yourself up through the drives of the first half of life to become somebody in the world. Then the sixth level is to do with the soul. I think it's incredibly important that we bring back the soul into the model of working with people. And the soul is just that part of you that's below conscious attention. You know, it's the personal soul with all the complexes of unresolved emotional issues. It's the family soul, the family dynamic you brought into. And then it's the mythological or archetypal soul that Jung described in great detail. And then the seventh level is the spirit body. You know, transcendent to the personal self is something beyond self. And that can be explained in many different ways. But we can relate to that if we choose to with attention and intention. And so I teach how to do that. So that's the model I use. And when I approach chronic complex illness, I go through all the layers and levels, trying to create a roadmap for people to follow, so that it's not just, oh, go and see your acupuncturist, oh, go and do, neurobiofeedback, oh, go to your psychologist, or go and take psychedelics. I try and structure it in a sequenced way for people to approach their complexity with some sense of a roadmap or order. So I now presently consult mostly. I did run a big clinic for 30 years, and I've shut that down as of November last year. And I just consult and teach online and see patients for 3 days of the week. The rest of the time I'm writing curriculum for my teaching.
So you are very focused on complex medical issues, which is why I wanted you to come on and talk to people. And I know we share a similar belief in the fact that your mitochondria are very important for this. Your mitochondria first and then your gut. So I kind of have this 10-step approach that we take at Modern Endocrine with people. And the first step is dealing with mitochondria and mitochondrial health. And so, we were talking before the podcast about mold and some of the chronic illnesses that people have that they've had for a long period of time, and they've seen multiple doctors and they've never really gotten better. And so I want you to kind of explain to people, why you think the mitochondria is so important when it comes to anything, when it comes to, just living everyday life, chronic illnesses, etc. And then you were telling me about this cell danger response. And so I want you to kind of explain to listeners, first of all, what is your mitochondria? Why is it important? And then how this cell danger response happens, which leads ultimately to illness and diseases. Does that make sense?
I'll do my best.
And we can kind of talk back and forth too. You don't have to give us a 30-minute lecture, but that's kind of the basis of where you start with chronic disease, right? Is the mitochondria.
Not necessarily, but generally, yes. The answer is yes. But sometimes you got to start with inherited family trauma, because it's so overwhelmingly obvious that whatever they're experiencing has nothing to do with them. It's for something they inherited epigenetically. Or they may have, mood disorders that are overwhelmingly sort of dominant, and you have to go and treat it at a different level before you can get to the mitochondrial illness, which is at the basis of most chronic illness. So so you don't always approach it from a mitochondrial point of view, but yes, 95 to 99% of all chronic diseases that present have mitochondrial heteroplasmy or abnormal mutations in mitochondrial DNA at the root of their complexity. That's true, no question.
So besides mood, you said that some things you have to look at from a epigenetic standpoint. What would it be besides like a mood? Like what sort of traumas are you talking about?
Well, ancestral traumas, people whose parents were murdered in the concentration camp, for instance, or people who jumped out of the towers in 9/11. The children and grandchildren experience, symptoms that have nothing to do with them. They inherited them epigenetically. If you look at the work of Rachel Uhidi, she's done all this work, formalized education on inherited epigenetic trauma from ancestral influences. So sometimes your symptoms may have nothing to do with you. You may be experiencing what your parents experienced, and you're just expressing it without any conscious attachment to this expression. So that's epigenetic inheritance of trauma.
So there is something to be said when they say, like, as a parent, if you are chronically stressed or you are chronically portraying yourself a certain way to children, that can actually affect how children function.
Well, that's direct transmission due to direct experience because children are tuned to the mother in the first 10 years of life, somewhat to the father in the second 10 years. That's not epigenetic transfer. That's direct limbic resonance with the mother's own internal dialogue and the way the mother's in the world. If the mother's offline, occupied mentally with some other issues, maybe the father's going out and cheating on her, her whole attention and prefrontal cortex is going to be in an upregulated sympathetic state or in a dorsal vagal shutdown state. The child whose prefrontal cortex is meant to go into limbic resonance with the mother will sense the mother's offline, and the child won't get the similar they won't be looked, the mother won't be looking the child in the eye, being present with the child. The child won't be finding the mother when they look towards the mother's gaze. So the child will then go offline, try and meet the security needs from the mother by adjusting their personality to suit the mother's gaze. So you go from your authentic self to a provisional self in order to meet the trauma that you're not, that's perpetuated by a parental influence. That's not epigenetic. That's just pure experiential. Epigenetic is your grandfather or your father was murdered, and you've inherited some of the symptomatology of that experience yourself, and you don't even know the connection until you look at it.
So how would you do that? You would get that from the stress that your parents had?
You have to do something called family constellation therapy. It was put onto the basics of family constellation therapy were divulged and written up by a man by the name of Bert Hellinger. He's subsequently died, and they've been carried on by another person who's brilliant at this called Mark Wolin, and he wrote a book called It Didn't Start With You. It's all about, the symptoms you experience may not have anything to do with you. You may have inherited them from your ancestors. So it's a whole process. It's at my sixth level of healing. It's looking at family systems. At the fourth level, it's early developmental experiences that regulate your HPA axis and your stress response. So it's different layers, different levels. But underneath it all, the mitochondria are what sense that, right? So the mitochondria's got 15, 16 functions, beta oxidation, proteolysis, all sorts of things, calcium influx and so forth. But the two most dominant functions of the mitochondria, number one is ATP production. We all know that, how we, through oxidative phosphorylation, convert energy from the sun and energy from food. And by just what people don't know is that the food that gets broken down in the electron transport chain through oxidative phosphorylation is only about 30% of the incoming signaling. What you do with regards to exposure to the sun and grounding and hydration, so sun, magnetism, and water, is what determines most of your mitochondrial functioning. It's not food. It's mostly how we expose ourselves to the outdoor environment. Second to that is what we do by shutting that down, the electron transport chain, by being exposed to non-native EMFs, cell phones, Wi-Fi routers, indoor LED lights, computer screens without any sort of software to protect yourself. So when you are indoors being exposed to non-native EMFs and you're not basking as a solar panel in the sun from morning to night, not all day, but certainly getting up in the morning with the sun, grounding during the day, and then at night switching off all your overhead lights and your screens and things, if you're not following circadian biology and quantum biology principles, your mitochondria will be less able to make energy, ATP. You'll undergo something called mitochondrial heteroplasmy. The mitochondria will become less efficient at producing energy. So that's the energy production part. The second most important function of mitochondria is the mitochondria are sensing. They sense toxic load. And as soon as they sense the toxic load, they undergo a huge metabolic transformation. So what happens is, as soon as they sense that the toxic load exceeds their homeostatic self-regulation, the electron voltage drops, the outer membrane of the mitochondria undergoes a voltage drop, oxygen consumption drops, but inside the cell it goes up. When it goes up inside the cell, it creates a free radical cascade, and then you'll find many metabolic shifts start occurring. Lipid membranes become more rigid, sulfur metabolism change, methylation defects occur, amino acids transfer becomes impaired. You get all these metabolic problems that start to happen in an attempt of the mitochondria to take the person away from the toxic danger. So the cell danger response, which is this inflammatory response, is actually evolutionary there to protect the individual from further damage. So we as functional medicine practitioners, we go and look at all the toxic load, mold and heavy metals or whatever you wish, glyphosate, and then we go and do all our metabolic testing. We do our food sensitivity, we do our gut microbiome, we do our gut permeability, we do antibodies to brain peptides, we look at, leaky gut, leaky brain, leaky mitochondria. We look at hormones, we look at all these, but those changes in the metabolic profile are defensive. They're actually evolutionary there to conserve you from further damage. So what we in functional medicine did for years is go and fix all those pathways. But the way you really fix the damage of the cell danger response is by restoring the patient back to the health cycle. And so Robert Naviaux's brilliant work on the cell danger response is a must to study when you're looking at mitochondrial inefficiencies. And so most of my clinical work now is not so much looking for all the toxins, even though I'm trained in, A4M and ACAM and IFM and, the whole cascade. We don't go chase down the toxic load. We identify the toxic load. We identify the metabolic changes that have occurred, but the primary therapeutic input is on establishing health cycle. And that's got about 20 different determinants to it. That if the patient's practicing, their metabolic shift occurs naturally because the terrain gets established through mitochondrial efficiency, and they don't need to go and do so much work because the electron flow is much more efficient and the body starts to produce energy and the body starts to heal itself. It's much more in the realm of vitalism, energy causing health, as opposed to biochemistry or Newtonian mechanistic medicine, which is we've got to give lotions and potions to turn people around. There's been a shift from level 2, mechanistic biomolecular medicine, to physics, to energy, to sun, to water, to light, to the mitochondria, because the mitochondria produce energy. Energy. 10 minutes without energy, you're dead. So we know shifting back to a vitalistic concept of medicine as opposed to a biochemical model. So that's what I'm doing presently, is assisting people to establish mitochondrial efficiency and mitochondrial energy production by removing the toxic load, introducing the signaling molecules, whether they be hormones or whatever, and then establishing the cell, the health cycle, and really being serious about the health cycle, not just paying lip service. Don't say, oh, you need to meditate. Oh, you need to go on a walk. Oh, you need to get sun. No. Are you getting up at sunrise? Are you outside for 50, 60 minutes with the early morning sunrise? Are you going outside an hour a day with your bare foot and grounding? Do you have iris on your computer to stop blue light emissions? Are you eating a nutrient-dense, local seasonal diet that provides the right nutrients to your mitochondria? Because fat's 4 times more efficient than carbohydrates in producing ATP. Are you turning off all your lights at night? No LED lights. Are you using blue light blocking glasses? Is your circadian rhythm established? and you ask people this and you give them handouts on what to do. Are you hydrating? Are you doing any cold immersions and cold thermogenesis, etc., etc., etc.? Really emphasizing the principles of the health cycle before running in and jumping in with, hormones and peptides and exosomes and whatever else.
I have lots of questions, Dr. Hoffman. So the first question, that was a lot of information. So I'm sure people listening their brains are spinning. So are you saying that simply going outside, grounding in the sun and drinking enough water could be enough to heal someone's mitochondria?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying unless you establish yourself and weave yourself back into the threads of nature, your chances of turning chronic disease around is diminished. So we've got to really think about what it means to be involved, because what we've done is we've shut out the sun. It's all toxic and put on your sunscreens, and it's nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. So, the principles of the health cycle require circadian biology and the principles of quantum biology in order to begin to reestablish electron flow through the mitochondria. And you've got to start there before you become heroic and then start using all your hormones and your peptides and everything else. If you take a patient off the street with chronic complex illness and you start throwing hormones and peptides and all the rest of it, you won't have as much success than if you ask them to establish themselves in the health cycle principles before they begin the signaling molecules. Robert Naveau's papers is essential in reading. He has one diagram like this, which is like everything. Here's your toxic load. Here's your metabolic shifting. Here's your signaling molecules you need to change. But here's the health cycle principle. Here's what you need to do to reestablish your connection to the most potent source of healing, which is the sun and the earth and the water. Because, water inside your cell membranes, you've got, there's 4 stages of water. And the 4th stage is this gel-like water called easy water, which separates into electrons and protons. And that gel-like water is what conducts the electrical flow through your mitochondria. And if you're not well hydrated and you don't have adequate easy water, you don't produce ATP, or you produce much limited ATP. So not just any water, it's like structured water, it's deuterium light water. There's a whole way that you induce easy water back into your mitochondrial system. There's about 20 things you can do to do that. It's not just drink more water. It's not that.
So I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, here's my question. There are millions, if not billions, of people in the world who live somewhere where it's going to be almost impossible to ground themselves, especially for an hour, right? So like if you live in New York City, if you live in Los Angeles, if you live in one of these places where there's not really a place to ground, what do you do in that case? Or if you live in Oklahoma City where I live, but you can't be outside for 60 minutes when the sun's coming up because you have to be at work, then what do you do in these situations?
So this is a question that's asked a lot. And depending on the mood of the practitioner who answers these questions, you get different answers. If you listen to Jack Kruse, have you heard of him? Jack Kruse is a neurosurgeon who has been probably the most vocal and the most advanced in his intellect in terms of advancing physics over biochemistry. Now, he's a neurosurgeon, and he's highly experienced, and he doesn't mince words. And he's a trip to listen to, because when people ask that question, he says, "What do you want me to tell you?" The first principle of getting a person well, there's 2 things that I've noticed over my 30-year, 40-year career. You don't get better in the same environment that you got sick in, and you often don't get better with the same mental field that you got sick in the first place. Your internal dialogue and the story you tell yourself about who you think you are and what's happened to you is probably not true. So, the first principle of getting well is, if you look at my handout on the health cycle, number one, relocate. And I'm serious about it. Jack Cruz get patients from Canada who are in 51 degrees northern latitude, no UVB for 9 months. No vitamin D, no UVB. Don't go outside, don't ground. And they phone them with MS and chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And he just says, get out of Canada. And they go, but I can't. I got to go to work. He says, what do you want me to tell you? The treatment is relocate to where the sun is so you can plug your solar panel back into the cycles of life. So the first answer is relocate. The second answer is, if you can't relocate from your latitudes to more tropics where there's more sun and magnetism, more electrons and magnetism, then relocate from inner city to rural. Because if you're rural, there's less non-native EMFs. And then the third is, if you can't do that, then you've got to redesign your home so that your exposure to non-native EMFs is diminished. And that you need a building biologist for. So building biologist is one of the most essential people on your team. They come in and assess your electrical fields, your magnetic fields, your radio frequency fields, and your dirty electricity. And they tell you how much you're being exposed to in the way of these non-native, they're not made in nature, they're man-made EMFs. And he will then say, you need to, turn off your router at night. You need to make sure your cell phone is in airplane mode. You need to turn off the breaker switch behind your bed at night for the 2 plugs that fire up your bedside lights. You need to move your bed away from the fridge that's behind you from the kitchen because the magnetic field is too intense. Or you need to get rid of your metal frame bed and get rid of your box spring mattress because you're conducting 3 volts of energy through your body when you sleep at night, and it should be less than 100 millivolts. So a building biologist will give you indications of what you need to do to create a sound environment. But the first is relocate to where the tropics are, get out of the city, or redesign your home. Those are the first 3 principles.
Where do you find a building biologist? Is this something you can just Google? Building biologist in Oklahoma City? Do I just Google that?
Buildingbiology.com.
Oh.
Seriously.
Okay.
And you bring them in, and they're part of your team. Your dentist is part of your team. Your nutritionist is part of your team. Your building biologist is part of your team. And if you've had trauma, then you need to work with some of the amygdala retraining and somatic experiencing people. They become part of your team. You need a bit of a team around you when you're processing chronic complex illness. It's very difficult to do it alone. And the people you work with have to be informed about all the possibilities of what you need to turn yourself around. It's complicated.
So let's say that you do live in Miami or the tropics or somewhere wonderful like that. You really think that somebody needs to be outside in the sun when it's rising for 60 minutes every day?
Yeah, so if you look at quantum biology and circadian biology, when you get out, I'm outside every morning at sunrise, 365 days of the year. But I do have a hot tub I can sit in if it's cold. But my hot tub faces the sunrise, so you watch the sunrise. As the sun rises, it starts activating certain receptors in your retinohypothalamic pathways, which then activates something called POMC, P-O-M-C. POMC then activates all of these alpha MSH and beta MSH and endorphins and neuropeptides. And you literally turn on your metabolism, your hormones, your neurotransmitters by sun. That's true. You just read up all on the circadian biology. That's how it works. So it's through the eyes, no sunglasses, no contact lenses. And if you've had cataracts and artificial lenses, you're pretty well screwed because they're not going to get sunlight through there. Not the rays, the amount of light that you need. Then you need to sun on your skin because melanin on your skin, developing a solar callus, a suntan, is what also goes back through the POMC pathway to regulate neurobiochemistry. So skin. And then your gut. Your gut is richly innervated with also melanin and POMC. So those are the three areas you need to get sun. So you need to get early morning sun to kickstart your neuropeptide and hormonal pathways. You make melatonin early morning sunrise. It gets stored and then comes out at night if you have 3 hours of darkness at night. But if you've got your LED lights on and you're watching TV, and like my patient this morning, I saw she's scrolling through her cell phone with Bluetooth on, cellular data on, and she's looking for meditation when she's being bombarded with non-native frequencies. That's not what you do, you know.
So if you have lenses in your eyes, like the lenses that they place in your eyes to help you see, then you're never going to get the correct sunlight.
You're not going to get the right signaling through the retinohypothalamic pathway back to the POMC in the hypothalamus and pituitary, no.
So then there's nothing you can do about that.
So people talk about that, and they try, and some people get the lenses taken out, and the people who manufacture lenses have been approached by Jack Kruse to try and get lenses made that do absorb light, and they've been disinterested to date, but he's still working on it.
That is interesting. Okay, so then if you have lenses in your eyes?
The only thing that people do is get them taken out, but then they have problems with accommodation and
So if you have lenses, then there would be no reason to go outside and look at the sun coming up.
No, you got your skin still. You're just not going to get the eyes. You can still be. Early morning sun creates infrared red and UVA. UVA rises around 10 o'clock. That actually prepares you for UVB at about 10 to 12. So UVA actually sets the stage for so if you have a lot of early morning sun on your skin, you actually don't burn as much because the UVA protects you from the UVB later on in the day. Now, we don't recommend you go burn yourself to a frazzle, because UVB does cause collagen to break down and elastin to break down, and it will age your skin. But I just was in South Africa for 2 months. I was brown. And I've been back in Canada at -20 for 2 months, and I'm now back to my normal color. I can't wait to get back in the sun.
So, okay. So those are all very interesting points. And so you talked a little bit about this cell danger response. And so basically that's just your body so I'm still kind of confused about the cell danger response from a perspective of a listener. So basically anything that is causing your body harm, whether it be an infection or you're not sleeping enough or your cortisol is high or you're stressed or you're eating processed food or whatever, you're worried about paying your bills, that will cause this cell danger response to occur. Is that right?
Well, those are the triggers of the cell danger response. So when the mitochondria sense danger, and they've got to exceed a certain threshold, because your mitochondria can have an experience of danger 50, 60, even 70%, causing heteroplasmy, malfunctioning. But once you cross a certain threshold, now Doug Wallace is the great mitochondrial researcher with Robert Naveau. Doug Wallace has gone on record saying you can live quite well until you have about 70% of mitochondrial heteroplasmy, dysfunction, in any one organ before you start to get symptoms. So as soon as you start getting symptoms, it means the mitochondria in that area have undergone this transition from ATP. They've shut down oxidative phosphorylation. They've shut down energy transfer, and they've gone into defensive mode. And in the defensive mode, the key triggers are the toxic load creates a huge upregulation of a free radical called peroxynitrate. And peroxynitrate is the final free radical that does all the damage. It then goes and damages the outer cell membrane, the inner cell membrane, then goes intracellularly and causes destruction of mitochondrial DNA, which then unravels. When mitochondrial DNA unravels, it releases ATP from inside the cell to outside the cell. Inside the cell, ATP does all the magic. outside the cell, it's highly inflammatory. When it's outside the cell, it then triggers what's called the purinergic halo. It creates this huge inflammatory cascade, and in particular, creates mast cell activation syndrome through 8 different pathways. Mast cells are white cells that, when they sense danger from the external ATP signaling, then send out 1,200 other inflammatory markers. So you go into this chronic inflammatory cycle, and then you get stuck in there. You can get stuck in this chronic inflammatory cycle unless you remove the stresses, re-establishing signaling molecule, but don't attempt it unless you're practicing all the principles of the health cycle, because that is what's going to restore your well-being. Robert Naveau in the cell danger response literature says there's 3 phases to the cell danger response. The first is the chronic inflammatory phase, where the mitochondria stop communicating, they send out all these inflammatory signals, and that's the person who's sick. And if it persists, they get stuck in it. They don't have a way out. The second phase is cell danger response 2, when the cells start to recover and they start to grow a little bit, and autophagy and mitophagy slows down, exosomes get secreted, peptides get secreted, and there's a little bit of harmony that starts to happen. Cell danger 3 is when peace is restored, and the mitochondria start to come back online, they talk to each other, organs start to function again, symptoms go down, reactivity goes down, people feel better, the brain starts to function. So the cell danger response can be stuck, and most people are stuck usually in cell danger 1. Now CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is an innate immune overactivity, is a cell danger response 1 condition. In each of the different phases, there are different conditions which can be perpetuated by the health cycle being stuck at that phase. So read Robert Naviaux's work. It's just beautiful. It's so elegant.
So in CIRS, they're basically stuck in this cell cycle phase 1, and so they're not able to like regenerate things or help themselves. And so that's where you talk about you need to look at this stress health response, or like the stress health cycle, and figure out how to move them to the next cycle so that they get better. That's what you're trying to do.
Well, you get them established in the health cycle, because then the signaling from the light is far more efficient, and then they can start to generate ATP again, but just through lifestyle. No fancy interventions, just lifestyle. And if they're not practicing it, their ability to come out of the cell danger response is much more difficult. Now, for 25 years, I was a functional medicine doctor, using tons of supplements and hormones and chelation. Not so much anymore. Not so much. Health cycle dominates. We still do hormones. We still treat gut permeability. We still treat, but it's not as hard work. You don't sweat as much. It's easier.
Okay. And so I know that you have this new 7-stage program, this medical curriculum that you've made to help train providers and how to, I think, is that what you're doing, is teaching them how to get people into this stress health cycle like correctly? Or what is the point of this curriculum and program that you've made?
Well, the 4 major determinants of the program are, one is the model that you use to assess people must be expanded beyond just physical symptoms. Toxicology, physical, structure, physics, electromagnetics, brain function, autonomic nervous system, that's all level 3. Trauma, you must be trauma informed, because many people come to you with high trauma backgrounds, and unless you know how to negotiate that, you're going to get stuck. Then you need to know the mental field of an individual. You need to know Ayurvedic doshas. You need to know Myers-Briggs typology. You need to know attachment styles. You need to know defense structures. You need to know how to negotiate all the roadblocks that you come up against when you're treating complexity. People will have belief systems that are impenetrable. They'll be highly resistant. You have to know how to negotiate that with the patient and reestablish some form of ventral vagal trust with them, because they're usually totally distrustful, and they're angry, and they're sick, and they feel terrible. And going to the traditional people whose palate is very limited, it's just, N squared, D squared, name of disease, here's your drug. Goodbye.
Yeah, and I think that's, unfortunately how doctors are trained now, right? So unfortunately, that's a problem that I'm hoping is going to change. But, traditional medicine, that's how they train you, right? Is here's the disease, here's the prescription.
It's not going to change. And I don't really want it to change. I want doctors to keep being doctors when they're necessary. Postgraduate, if they're interested, shift the archetype from doctor as hero and all-knowing to doctor as healer. That's a very different archetype, because the doctor as healer is very aware of the healthy part of the patient and the sick part of themselves. And so you don't go as hero, you go as in limbic resonance with your patient, and you try and, through patient advocacy and your experience with a very expanded palette of what you've learned, help them negotiate the complexity across all layers and all levels with an expanded roadmap. You try and use mitochondrial inefficiency as your starting point. You try and work through disease and well-being, because people, once they experience well-being, that's a whole different ball game. It's a whole different relationship that you have with somebody. And so the model I've developed is trying to create a more experienced practitioner using a much wider palette in order to interact meaningfully with the patients who present, and not just doctor as hero, patient as all sick. And then they learn to survive that one-sided relationship, which is very disempowering.
No, I would completely agree with that. I think that, doctor as hero is one thing. I think of like surgeons, I think of ER doctors, you need doctors like that in certain circumstances, right? You need, the guy who did the cardiac bypass surgery on my dad, we need that hero. Like, I can't do that. Nobody else can do that. If you get a gunshot wound, the surgeon that takes that out and stops your bleeding artery, you need that, right? But then most healing, I think, to your point, because like I did primary care, most healing and chronic illnesses in this country need somebody with empathy, somebody with zero ego, and somebody who is willing to sometimes say the things patients don't want to hear. Like, to your point, like I tell people all the time, like, in order for me to make you well, you have to give up the lifestyle that made you sick. Are you ready to do that? And if the answer is no, then you're wasting my time and your money. You can go down the street and get any doctor in Oklahoma City to write you all the prescriptions you want. That's not what we do at Modern Endocrine, right? Like, I'm not here to write you prescriptions, and I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you the truth, which is, your lifestyle sucks. You're not sleeping enough. You're being mean to yourself. You have some trauma you need to talk to somebody about. All these things. And so it's true. I think that people want that out of medicine, and that shift is happening, which is good. But to your point, it's kind of difficult. Like right now I'm working on training a couple of providers, and it's really hard because you don't learn any of this in school. And so it takes to your point, it's taken me a long time to learn it. It took you a long time to learn it. And so that's the unfortunate, I guess, thing for patients, is that there's not a lot of people who have that mindset currently.
That's why it's a new medical curriculum.
Yeah. So Dr. Hoffman is helping with that, and we'll make sure that we put all these links in the show note. And I appreciate that. I think that's amazing. That's what we're working on at Modern Endocrine too. I'm almost done with this really good gut curriculum, not only for patients. I'm doing one for patients, one for providers, because every provider should be talking to their patients about their gut health and their diet and their nutrition. But we don't learn any of that in school. And I have a million people who reach out to me and they're like, well, how did you learn this? And I'm like, like here and there, and reading papers and just talking to patients. And so I'm putting together a curriculum as well for things like that. So I appreciate you in doing that, because it is very difficult. It's very complex. And to your point, I know this because I did this. When I first started doing functional medicine, like you said, at the very beginning, it was like, oh, only supplements or only hormones will fix this. Hormones and supplements don't fix chronically ill people. You've got to address their gut. You've got to address their emotional health. You've got to address their mitochondria. You have to address trauma. Like, there's so many things, to your point, sunlight, sleep. There's so many things that you have to address. And so it takes time. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a patient that's really invested too.
I'm trying to provide the roadmap based on my experience and trainings to so that it's not as difficult. I mean, it's still difficult because the inner and outer experience of the physician and the patient relationship is going to be dependent on what the inner physician of the healer, the knowledge, so the wisdom and the knowledge of the person you're seeing, and then is it in limbic resonance with the patient? Is there a roadmap you can follow that short circuits some of the complexity without using trial and error? I'm trying to bring together that roadmap. I just did a lecture 2 days ago for an hour and a half, which I'll make. It's a webinar I did describing this model in much more detail with PowerPoint slides. And if you want to make it available to your whoever's interested, I'm sure my staff can provide you with the link. So I'll go into detail with PowerPoint on what I'm, with visuals as to what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make a note that we're going to get that link from your assistant and we'll put it in the show notes. So if people want to look at that, I think that's very beneficial. So I appreciate you kind of diving into this different form of functional medicine with me. I've been very focused on the gut, but I do think mitochondria is very important. And I love a lot of the topics that you bring up. And we'll make sure and put all your stuff in the show notes as well as far as your social media. I know that you put a lot of very interesting and good things on social media too, so people can actually get some ideas of how they can do this, how they can fix certain things, and ideas of how to get outside more and how to get light into your eyes and how to ground.
Get light on their stomach.
On their stomach. Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of work being done on the gut microbiome being influenced by melanin, but induced by sun on the gut. And they've even developed a lot of, swimwear, which is see-through. So your sun will penetrate through it'll hide your privates, but it'll penetrate and do your perineum and your GI tract at the same time. I just let me give a plug for somebody who's in this space, Alexis Jasmine. She's a quantum biologist in the Jack Kruse model, and you started out as a gut microbiologist for 20 years, I think, and now the light's been turned on, and she's realized that the gut microbiome is much better assisted by quantum and circadian biology principles than it is through food. So she's worth checking out.
So let me ask you this: when you say light, does red light therapy, like if you have a medical grade red light therapy, does that count?
Yes.
Okay, great. So then I do my red light bed. I don't see the sun every morning. I'm already working out. I don't.
Are you working out in the gym?
I'm working out in the gym.
Blue light, not good for you.
I know.
Put your gym outdoors, work out outdoors, watch the sunrise, no blue light. I'm just saying that these things have been proven.
So I'll tell my husband we need to put a gym in the backyard. But I do get in my red light bed every day. We have a medical grade red light bed at our clinic. It's amazing. I love that thing. And so I get in that thing for 20 minutes every day. So at least I'm getting that.
You're getting that, but the sun's 24 hours, sun's 12 hours. So you're getting 20 minutes.
I do go for walks in the morning and I do go for walks at night after dinner, but unfortunately I'm stuck in the clinic, at least for right now, seeing patients. I guess we could also just move clinic. Maybe we should just think about moving our clinic outside and doing clinic.
People do that. Jack Kruse, he's been interviewed. He's sitting outside with his shirt off.
Okay. With his patients?
He does Zoom calls.
Okay.
And he uses a computer that's got no blue light.
My patients would think I was insane if I was sitting outside on the back patio with my shirt off doing interviews with them. We're not.
By the way, for grounding, when you walk, get yourself shoes with a copper thing on the bottom. Grounding shoes.
Grounding.
Yeah, from a clinic called Rizal, R-H-I, not a clinic, a website, R-H-I-Z-A-L. And if you go into Etsy and you just Google grounding shoes, they're all over the place. So if it is cold, you can still use grounding shoes and get benefit.
Okay, so I need some copper grounding shoes. I'll look into all of that. So thank you for all those tips. I do, your significant other actually turned all the blue light off on my phone when I met her in June of last year. So I've never turned it back on. So I don't have the blue light from my phone. She like immediately took my phone and was like, what are you doing? And changed all these settings. And I actually have Iris on my computer because of her too. So I have some blue light blocking. I have my glasses too that she made me get. So I'm working on it, but I will do that. So I would like to ask you 3 questions as we kind of wrap up, if that's okay. I ask everyone these questions. I don't want you to overthink it, but I'm curious as to what you would say. What is one food that's most beneficial to your mitochondria and why?
Fat, protein and fat.
So any fat?
Well, saturated fat, but you also want essential omega-6 and 3s. This whole no omega-6 trend is disastrous. Don't follow it, please. It's wrong. You need omega-6s, you need omega-3s through fish. So fish for omega-3s, particularly DHA, and then protein and fat. Those are the foods that fire up the mitochondria. Carbohydrates are poor fuel. They're 4 times less efficient to produce ATP than fat. So fat and protein.
Fat and protein. Okay. And it doesn't matter. It can be any fat and protein. You're fine with all of it.
Well, no, make sure that it must be grass-fed, grass-finished. You can't go buy, Safeway meats and things. You can't do that. Those are toxic.
And I know that you're also very big about eating in season too. I know that. So eating things that are in season. Yeah. Okay. What is one thing that anyone can do? And I think I know your answer to this. What is one thing that anyone can do that's 100% free that will benefit their health?
Follow circadian health principles. They're all free. So just get my handout, and I'm willing to send it to you. Oh, in the slides, if you do get the slideshow, I go 2 pages of the health cycle. You can just download them. Follow those. All free.
Okay. And I'm assuming it's go outside and ground and things like that, which are free. And then the last question is, what is one thing you wish you would have known about your health, let's say 30 years ago, and that you would have done differently?
I'm speaking to you. I'm sure, I don't know how many decades separate us, but I've gone to 290 conferences and I've got 11 different trainings. I would work from sun up to sundown. I go to work in the dark, go home in the dark, then write protocols and look at patient charts for 30 years. And then I got an aortic aneurysm that was too big and I had to get emergency surgery before it burst. And I know that my aortic aneurysm was produced by inflammation, by living the lifestyle that I chose to live. So that humbled me. I shut down my practice. I now changed the way I lead my lifestyle. I still do what I love to do, which is this, but I'm shifting my health priorities from education and teaching and running a clinic to my own health practices, my own health cycle principles first, and then fulfilling my other destiny, which is to keep doing what I'm doing. So I wish I'd done that 20 years earlier.
I like that. I'm trying to do that myself. I agree. The sun up to sundown is...
We think we have time. We don't have time. We sacrifice time for money and career. You eventually, Myron Vance from Sanoviv said, isn't it amazing and ironic? We spend our whole first half of life doing all the things we love to do, accumulating our goals in life and accumulating all the money that we want. And then we spend the second half of life spending all the money we accumulated to fix the health that we neglected.
No, it's true. I love the quote too of, the busy entrepreneur, the busy person has 1,000 problems, and they have all 1,000 problems until they have a serious health condition, and then they have one problem, and that's it. And it's so true. Like,
raise health as your number one value no matter what your age is. You think you've got time, wait until you get something that shuts you down. Then you realize you sacrificed a lot for time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that that's all very valuable information. So I want to say thank you for all the work that you've done. All the work you're doing to educate providers and patients is all very important work. And thank you for your time today. We will link all your stuff in the show notes. I'll get the link from the webinar that you did so patients can get that, and make sure that all your social media is linked as well.
Get it from Maria. She knows how to link. I have no clue how to link anything. So she'll do it for you.
Okay, we'll take care of you. But thank you so much. And thanks for coming on. Have a great day.
Okay, Cassie. See you. Thanks very much.
I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode of Hormones, Metabolism, and You. I know it was packed full of a lot of things. Sometimes it got a little difficult to follow when we talked about quantum physics, but I think there was a lot of really great information to take out of that and some tips that you can do on a daily basis to help restore your health cycle and make your mitochondria healthier. Again, like I said, if you know anyone who's dealing with chronic illnesses, anyone who struggles with illnesses, who's seen doctors, who has not gotten better, who is just sick, please, please, please share this episode with them. That's why I do this. It's for education. I want people to realize there is a route besides traditional medicine. There is a way to heal yourself from a functional standpoint. And some of the things we talked about are free and very easy. Light therapy, grounding, drinking water. And so just please share this with anyone who you think it would be beneficial. Make sure you're following us anywhere that you get podcasts. We have our podcast release every week on Spotify, on Apple, and on YouTube. Also, find me on social media. I'm very active on social media. I like to educate. So please, chime in. Let me know what you want to learn about. Let me know who you want me to interview. Let me know what questions you have. And I'm happy to make content around that. Lastly, please remember that Modern Endocrine is licensed in 39 states and growing. We plan to be in all 50 by the end of 2025. We do virtual visits. We are happy to see you for complex medical conditions. We do look at mitochondrial support. We also do a lot of gut health, hormones, weight loss. We do all of it. So if you're interested in becoming a patient, check out our website, or we'll have information in the show notes for that as well. Thank you so much for joining us this week and for putting in the time to educate yourself and to try to become a healthier version of yourself. I appreciate that, and see you next week.
The information presented, including any materials discussed, referenced, or linked within this podcast, are for general educational purposes only, not the practice of medicine. No doctor-patient relationship is formed from you listening to this podcast or utilizing any of the information provided. I am a doctor, but I am not talking to you as your doctor. The information provided is not intended to diagnose or treat health problems, or take the place of the professional medical care provided by your doctor. If you are experiencing any health problems, including problems you believe have been touched upon in any respect within this podcast, you should consult your doctor about the problems without delay. You may ask your doctor whether he or she believes the information I have provided would be helpful to you, but you should still consult your doctor immediately and follow his or her medical advice as your treating physician. I'm just here to provide you basic knowledge about the issues we discuss so you are more aware of them and can better discuss them with your doctor. That's why we call it Back to the Basics. Join me on the next episode as we continue our journey.